The United States has the largest economy in the world by nominal GDP at $28 trillion, surpassing Japan, Germany, India, and the UK. The US is the most powerful democracy militarily, with the world's largest defense budget at $850 billion. It also has leadership in NATO with military bases worldwide. The United States has 50 states, and according to the US Census Bureau, the official population estimate for the United States as of July 1st, 2024 is 340,110,988 citizens. Georgia was the fourth state to ratify the US Constitution. It became a state on January 2nd, 1788. Georgia is ranked the eighth most populous state, with an estimated population of 11,180,878 citizens. In terms of nominal GDP in 2024, Georgia ranks the eighth amongst all U.S. states, with a GDP of approximately $882.5 billion. The state of Georgia is named after King George II of Great Britain. It was the last of the original 13 colonies to be established. The colony was founded by James Oglethorpe as a place for debtors and the poor to start anew, and also to serve as a buffer between British South Carolina and Spanish Florida. Georgia was officially founded as a British colony in 1733. The Native American tribes in Georgia at the time of European contact were the Creek Nation and the Cherokee Nation. In 1830, both the Cherokee and the Creek were subjected to forced relocation by the U.S. government under the Indian Removal Act. Atlanta is the capital city of Georgia since the year 1868. The population estimate from 2024 is about a half a million in the city, over 6 million in the metropolitan area. Metro Atlanta is one of the largest and fastest growing metropolitan areas in the southeastern United States. Atlanta is located in Fulton County, Georgia. Fulton County is named after Robert Fulton, 1765 to 1815, an American engineer and inventor best known for inventing the first commercially successful steamboat, the Clermont, in 1807. His work revolutionized transportation and commerce in the early 19th century, especially on U.S. rivers. Robert Fulton is buried in Trinity Churchyard in Manhattan, New York City. He had no direct connection to Georgia. He was a nationally celebrated figure, and many places in the U.S. are named in his honor. Stone Mountain is located just east of Atlanta, and it's one of Georgia's most iconic landmarks. Stone Mountain Park is in Stone Mountain, Georgia, a suburb about 15 miles east of downtown Atlanta. Stone Mountain is a massive quartz monzonite dome, a type of granite. It rises about 825 feet above the surrounding area and is about 1,686 feet above sea level. It's one of the largest exposed granite outcrops in the world. The mountain is famous and controversial for its Confederate memorial carving, the largest bas relief sculpture in the world. The carving depicts Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, and Stonewall Jackson. The carving is larger than a football field. Work began in 1916 but wasn't completed until 1972. The site has long been associated with Confederate symbolism and even the Ku Klux Klan, though public perception and use of the park have evolved over time. Despite its controversial history, the area is now a major public park and recreational area, featuring a scenic railroad, a sky ride, an aerial tram to the summit, a laser light show, which is seasonal, museums and historic exhibits, golf courses, lakes, and camping and hiking trails, including a popular walk up trail to the summit. At the summit of Stone Mountain, you'll find a unique blend of natural scenery, geological features, and a panoramic view. At the summit of Stone Mountain, you can view downtown Atlanta on a clear day, Kennesaw Mountain, the Appalachian foothills, and even into Alabama and South Carolina on especially clear days. Groups do occasionally meet at the summit of Snow Mountain, and formal group gatherings, hikers, fitness groups, and nature lovers often meet at the summit, and also spiritual and religious groups. A podcast titled Megalithic Mysteries in Atlantis, Georgia, September 21st, 2025, references a handful of videos circulating on social media, which purportedly show a group gathering in Georgia and chanting, Atlanta is Atlantis. The description suggests the intent was to create an energy vortex to summon the spirit of Atlantis and reclaim the city for Black people. The host also expresses skepticism, calling it growing stupidity about human history. And the host admits difficulty finding collaborating sources for this event. Megalithic Mysteries in Atlantis, Georgia, September 21st, 2025. A handful of videos on social media depict a recent gathering, reportedly in Georgia, where a group of people were gathered to chant Atlanta is Atlantis. Supposedly, they were there to create an energy vortex in order to summon the spirit of Atlantis and reclaim the city for Black people. What exactly is this supposed to mean? Atlanta was founded in 1837 as a railroad terminus, originally named Terminus because the city marked the end of the Western and Atlantic Railroad. It was renamed Marthasville in 1843 and then changed to Atlanta in 1845. Some believe the city name is shorthand for Atlantica, as in the Atlantic Ocean. Others believe the city was named after Atalanta, a mythologized heroine known for her speed and independence, the wild boar hunt, and race against her suitors, which were qualities of the growing rail hub that is Atlanta. The mythical land and concept of Atlantis in some ways even predates Plato, though he is credited with its story. Writing in his Timaeus and Critias, Plato derived the Atlantis story from Solon, an Athenian lawmaker, who learned of the same from an elderly priest in the land of Egypt at the temple of Sais. At the time, around 630 to 560 BC, the records were already at least 8,000 years old. Reportedly, a global cataclysm destroyed Atlantis sometime between 9,600 to 11,600 years ago. Later on, Francis Bacon termed his ideal city the New Atlantis or Platanopolis. The time frame noted by Plato places the destruction within the window of the Younger Dryas, 12,900 to 11,700 years ago, 10,900 to 9,700 BC. Some scientists believe the period of the Younger Dryas was a time of a global flood. And so some connect this global flood with the flood of Noah. And the idea of going to high places like mountaintops, temples, to connect with the divine, open portals, or interact with other realms is ancient and deeply rooted across many cultures. Let's connect the dots between modern day events like the Atlanta is Atlantis chant and ancient high place rituals, such as those at Gobekli Tepe and ziggurats in Babylon, and why Atlantis, or a story of the flood, fits into this narrative. Collins, Atlas of the Bible, 2003 edition, hardcover, edited by James Picard, James Bennett Picard, 1909 to 1997, was a leading American archaeologist and biblical scholar, renowned for his work integrating ancient Near Eastern archaeology with the study of biblical history. He held positions at the University of Pennsylvania as a curator and professor, and he was widely recognized for his excavations in places like Gibeon, Tel Es Idea, and Sarepta. Among his most celebrated achievements was his influential anthology, Ancient Near Eastern Texts, relating to the Old Testament. James B. Picard's work is considered highly valuable for serious biblical historians, especially those interested in the intersection of archaeology, geography, and biblical texts. Picard wasn't just a scholar, he was an archaeologist who conducted major excavations in the Near East. His findings directly informed his editorial work, giving his atlases and anthologies a level of first-hand archaeological credibility. His atlases, including the Collins Atlas of the Bible, presents biblical narratives alongside historical and geographical context, which helps scholars ground scriptures in its real-world setting. This is especially useful for reconstructing biblical timelines. From Collins' Atlas of the Bible, in the beginning, hunters and gatherers, producers of food, climatic amelioration following the last glacial period, made possible a rapid expansion, 12,500 to 11,000 BC, of bands of hunter-gatherers into hospitable regions of the Levant. Sometime after 11,000 BC, However, food resources diminished due to climatic crisis, and the expanding populations were forced to reorganize themselves into an entity known as the Natufian culture. The Natufian culture is the biblical Canaanites. James B. Picard's Collins Atlas of the Bible begins its timeline around 12,500 to 11,000 BCE, which coincides with the Younger Dryas, a sudden cooling event 12,900 to 11,700 BC, and the alleged date Plato gave for the sinking of Atlantis, 9,000 years before Solon, or roughly 11,600 BC. In the Collins Atlas of the Bible, Picard doesn't refer to Plato, Atlantis, or the Younger Dryas by name. The scholarly purpose behind early timeline inclusion ground the biblical world in the evolution of human culture. Even biblical scholars, consciously or not, work within a Western intellectual tradition that has been shaped heavily by Plato and the ancient Greeks. Plato's work has a huge influence on the Western mind, including biblical interpretation. Plato is arguably the most influential philosopher in Western intellectual history. His ideas form a core foundation of how we in the Western world think about reality. Platonism, about structured education and rational inquiry. How Westerners view the soul, morality, and idealism. How Westerners approach myth, narrative, and truth. In fact, Philo of Alexandria, first century Israelite philosopher, explicitly tried to merge the Torah and Plato, setting a precedent followed by many early Christian thinkers, like the Church Fathers. Even modern biblical scholars who use archaeology or pursue archaeology, linguistics, or historical criticism work within methods derived from Enlightenment and classical thought, themselves rooted in Greek philosophy. Even the timeline in Picard's Collins Atlas of the Bible, by including prehistory and deep antiquity, reflects a Platonic, westernized sensibility or worldview. The Bible, that the Bible in their eyes is seen through the eyes of Plato. It's Plato's worldview. So the Bible timeline is off because it's Plato's timeline. The biblical scholars have to fit the biblical narrative within Plato's timeline. So the flood and Atlantis is the same period. Also with the scientific Younger Dryas, all around 10,000 BC. So this timeline was influenced by Greek philosophy and not the biblical text. The writer of the article concluded his article with this final thought. It's one thing to be unaware of seemingly lost, drowned, or buried history, but another to be so shockingly unaware of basic mythology and recent local history. It is understandable so many are disenfranchised by the lies and ego of mainline historical narratives. But the turn to QAnon, Flat Earth, Tataria, and World Fairs conspiracies appears to be another layer of disinformation rather than the truth. The Atlanta is Atlantis video exemplifies a growing stupidity about human history. I can only speculate that although the group on top of Stone Mountain was chanting Atlanta is Atlantis, they were advertised as some local strange black group. But it seems suspicious that this group mirrored the writings of the Western elite's favorite philosopher, Plato. Many researchers, mythologists, and alternative historians have explored the idea that the global flood myth is a shared memory of a real cataclysm, and that elite intellectuals, with their esoteric traditions, preserve the ritual or symbolic significance of that event, the flood. Researchers in this field include Manly P. Hall, The Secret Teaching of All Ages, Graham Hancock, Magicians of the Gods, John Anthony West, Serpent in the Sky, Rudolf Steiner, and Helena Blavatsky, both with their esoteric cosmologies, and Carl Jung with his archetypes like the Great Mother and the Flood. So, was this local black group supported by the Western elites to push their philosophies onto a local black community who are not informed about classical Roman and ancient Greek and occult literature? Well, let's investigate the origin of rituals that take place on the top of mountains that are used to open up a vortex or a portal, and the way the Bible condemned such practices for the children of Israel. You shall utterly destroy all the places where the nations whom you shall dispossess serve their gods, on the high mountains and on the hills and under every green tree. The book of Deuteronomy, chapter 12, verse 2. This verse is part of the instructions that Moses gave to the children of Israel as they prepared to enter the promised land, the land of Canaan. The core message: the Israelites are commanded to destroy all pagan places of worship in the land they are inheriting. These sites are often described as being on high places, mountaintops, and hilltops, and under green trees, reflecting common Canaanite religious practices, especially fertility cults and nature worship. Ancient Canaanite religions often built shrines in natural sacred spaces, groves, hilltops, mountain terraces. These places were believed to be closer to the gods. These practices were widespread across the Near East. The command in Deuteronomy is radical: to remove every trace of old religious order. Why? Because of the historical events that took place right after the flood. Universal Center for Renovation presents historical and biblical Israelites. This is strictly for educational purposes and commentary. This video is of biblical and secular historical literature, so enjoy. Anthropology and archaeology are extremely important when reconstructing biblical history. They provide critical context, evidence, and interpretation that helps scholars and researchers understand the people, cultures, and events described in the Bible. There are many powerful benefits to using artificial intelligence, AI, in the study of biblical, Near Eastern, and global history. AI can accelerate research, uncover new insights, and integrate massive data sets that would be impossible for a single human or even a team to manage manually. Looking at the world from a Torah and biblical worldview can offer deep and unique insights. especially when applied to understanding human nature, ethics, history, culture. It's a comprehensive framework for interpreting life, time, morality, identity, and the divine and human relationship. The Torah and Bible offers a rich anthropology, a view of what it means to be human. Humans are created in the image of the Most High. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 to 27, suggesting inherent dignity, purpose, and moral responsibility. This view offers a moral anchor and a relativistic culture and suggests human beings are not just biological accidents, but moral and spiritual agents. The Torah provides an extensive legal and ethical system aimed at building a just society. This worldview can guide approaches to law, poverty, fairness, and social responsibility in a deeply moral way. They found a plain in Babylon, the land of Shinar. The book of Genesis, chapter 11, verse 2. This short verse is packed with significance. The land of Shinar is generally understood to refer to ancient Mesopotamia, particularly the southern region, which includes Babylon and Ur of the Chaldees, Abraham's birthplace. Shinar is a biblical name for Sumer or Babylonia. This area is the cradle of civilization, home to early writing systems like cuneiform, the Tower of Babel, and ziggurats, tower-like temples. This plain refers to the broad, flat land of Mesopotamia, very suitable for agriculture, urbanization, and city building. Large-scale construction, like towers or temples. The book of Genesis, chapter 11, verse 2, strongly implies that the people came from a mountainous or elevated region before settling in the flat plain of Shinar. The important contextual clue is that they moved from a higher elevation to a plain. The plain of Shinar is flat, low-lying, and river-fed. Mesopotamia, the mountainous region, would likely be eastern Turkey, Armenia, and northern Mesopotamia. In Genesis chapter 8, verse 4, Noah's Ark comes to rest on the mountain of Ararat, traditionally located in modern-day eastern Turkey or Armenia, well north of Shinar. The implications in Genesis is that human civilization began again in the high lands post-flood area of northern Mesopotamia, then spread outward and downward towards southern Mesopotamia. The complete works of Josephus, Flavius Josephus, born in the year 37 and died in the year 100 AD. He was a Hebrew Levite priest, historian, and Pharisee who wrote extensively about Israelite history, especially during the Second Temple period and the Jewish-Roman Wars. His surviving works, collectively referred to as the complete works of Josephus, includes Antiquity of the Jews, a comprehensive history from creation through the proclamation of the Roman procurator Florus, spanning 20 books. It retells biblical narratives and post-biblical Jewish history up to the first century. Also, War of the Jews, a 7-book account written in 70 AD, documenting the Jewish revolt against Rome from Antiochus IV to the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. This work was originally written in Aramaic or Hebrew, but now only the Greek manuscripts survived. Josephus does mention that after the flood, people were afraid to come down from the mountains because of lingering fear that the floodwaters might return. Book 1, Chapter 4 of Antiquities of the Jews, where Josephus is elaborating on the psychological and cultural aftermath of the flood. He provides a unique interpretive angle that's not directly stated in Genesis, but likely reflects Hebrew oral traditions or his own explanatory additions. He also implies that people were hesitant to leave the highlands where Noah's ark landed, the mountains of Ararat. This fear motivated the construction of a high structure, for example, the Tower of Babel. The tower was in part a defensive measure, showing distrust in the Most High's covenant. The book of Genesis, chapter 9, verses 11. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, chapter 4, concerning the Tower of Babylon and the confusion of tongues. Now the sons of Noah were three, Shem, Japheth, and Ham, born 100 years before the deluge or the flood. These first of all descended from the mountains into the plains and fixed their habitations there, and persuaded others who were greatly afraid of the lower grounds on account of the floods, and so were very loth to come down from the higher place to venture to follow their examples. Now the plain in which they first dwelt was called Shinar. Josephus identifies Nimrod, Genesis chapter 10, verse 8 to 10, as the central figure in the story. Nimrod is portrayed as a tyrant, using his power to lead people away from the Most High. He persuaded the people to build the tower as a defense against another flood, directly defying the Most High's promise never to flood the earth again. Genesis chapter 9. Nimrod, he said he would be revenged on God if he should have a mind to drown the world again, for that he would build a tower too high for the waters to reach. After the destruction of the Tower of Babel in Genesis chapter 11, we're not explicitly told what architectural practices followed. But historically and archaeologically, the ziggurat emerges as the dominant sacred structure in Mesopotamia. Many scholars, theologians, and archaeologists view ziggurats as either continuations of the Babel building impulse or echoes of the Tower of Babel itself. Ziggurats were massive, stepped pyramid temples built in ancient Mesopotamia, especially in Sumer, Akkad, Babylonia, and Assyria. Ziggurats were man-made mountains, deliberately built to mimic the sacredness and symbolism of natural mountains, especially in flat plains like those in Mesopotamia, where there were no real mountains nearby. In the ancient world, especially in biblical and Near Eastern contexts, mountains were seen as closer to the heavens, to the gods, places of divine revelation. For example, Mount Sinai, Mount Moriah, Mount Ararat. They were enduring, immovable, and eternal, qualities associated with deities. In cultures where real mountains weren't available, people constructed ziggurats as artificial holy mountains to simulate the experience of ascending into the presence of the divine. Ziggurats, mountains built by man, terraced structures like ascending steps toward the divine realm. High elevation simulates mountain heights, allow approaches to the heavens with the temple at the top. The top of the ziggurat was seen as a place where heaven and earth met, often called the navel of the world or gateway of the gods. This is why the people on top of Stone Mountain was trying to open up a portal or a gateway of the gods. This was a reenactment of an ancient ritual. Now, do you still believe that that event was a grassroots event? The claim that early Mesopotamian populations, especially those in Sumer or surrounding regions, are characterized as having an astroloid, negroid substratum has indeed appeared in older anthropological writings. Various 19th and early 20th centuries anthropologists using cranial morphology attempted to categorize Mesopotamian remains into broad types: Australoid, Armenoid, Euro-African, interpreted as African-related. Buxton and Rice analyzed 26 Sumerian skulls, categorizing 17 as Australoid, 5 as Austric, and 4 as Armenoid. Other scholars like Sir Arthur Keith observed physical similarities between Sumerian crania and those of tropical Upper Egypt. Similar claims emerge regarding Elamites, inhabitants of the region around Susa, where H. G. Wells and Sir Harry Johnson suggest a strong Negroid strain, including portrayals in ancient iconography. While terms like Australoid and Negroid are largely outdated and avoided in modern anthropology, they are still used in certain applied contexts, such as forensic anthropology and medical diagnostics. The term Negroid is replaced with sub-Saharan African ancestry, West African, East African, etc. Australoid is replaced with indigenous Australian, Papuan, Dravidian, Melanesian. The artwork is historically correct. With the assistance of artificial intelligence, AI, this recreated painting shows Sumerians of the early dynastic Shinar period, 2900 to 2500 BC, with the physical features that anthropologists like Johnson, Liptak, and Sergi described for the original substratum of Mesopotamia. Key elements in the image: skin tones. The people are shown with deep chocolate brown to dark bronze skin, reflecting the Euro-African Proto-Mediterranean type, documented in early skeletal remains of Sumer, Kish, and Ur. This is consistent with anthropological descriptions linking the earliest Mesopotamians to Australoid, Negroid, Vedoid affinities. Facial features: broad noses, strong jaws, fuller lips, the highland physical type of the Near East. Their hair is rendered as thick, curly, or woolly, a variation that early anthropologists noted appeared alongside straight wavy hair in the same populations. Anthropological context. The figures here represent the original substratum of Sumer before later admixture with northern Caucasoid Mediterranean elements. This aligns with how archaeologists describe the early inhabitants of Shinar: robust, dark-skinned, and part of the same highland Euro-African stock seen in the Levant and Anatolia. Substratum means the original group and their parents. In anthropological terms, a substratum population is the earlier, often indigenous group that lived in a region. Physical traits: cranial shape, skin tone, hair texture, etc. Historically, early anthropologists tried to categorize substratum populations by morphology, physical appearance, being accurate when studying or discussing ancient history, especially topics like ancestral population, substratum people, or biblical history, is important for several critical reasons, both academic and ethical. The foundation of any serious historical, archaeological, or anthropological research is the pursuit of truth. If we misidentify or misrepresent past peoples, we build faulty narratives. Accuracy helps us understand who people were, where they came from, how civilizations rose and fell. Without accuracy, our view of history becomes mythology, propaganda, or fiction. Every group, ancient or modern, deserves to have its story told correctly and respectfully. Mislabeling populations distort cultural identity, erase indigenous contributions. Accuracy in representation is a form of justice for people long gone or lost but not forgotten, and that's real knowledge. The top of ziggurats in ancient Mesopotamia was understood to be a sacred space, often viewed as a portal, gateway, or meeting point between the divine and the human realm, a place where priests or kings might engage in ritual communication with the deity. On the top of Stone Mountain, what god was the people calling on? Isn't that a fair question? The cultural setting: the people are climbing the monumental ziggurat steps, which symbolize the temple tower of Sumer. Their attire, striped robes and jewelry, is faithful to Sumerian artistic depictions found in mosaics and cylinder seals. Symbolism: in the foreground, elite women and men are richly dressed, standing in procession, showing the hierarchical society of Sumer. In the background, crowds ascend the steps, symbolizing religious and social unity centered on the temple. Ziggurats were symbolic representations of mountains in the flat landscapes of Mesopotamia. They weren't just massive buildings, they were sacred, man made mountains, deliberately constructed to imitate the natural high places where the divine was believed to dwell. Flavius Josephus, in his work Antiquities of the Jews, provides a historical and interpretive account of the post flood world, and specifically of Nimrod, that includes details not found in the biblical text, but drawn from Israelite tradition and historical reflection. Josephus writes, "Now the plain in Shinar, in which they first dwelt after the flood, was called Babylonia. But they left the mountains where they had dwelt before, and came down into this plain." Sites like Göbekli Tepe in modern-day southeastern Turkey and others such as Karahan Tepe, Neva Kori, and Kayuno are ancient mountaintop or highland ritual centers that fit well with the post-flood world narrative described in Genesis and expanded by Josephus. This area is one of the most ancient continuously inhabited regions on Earth and a cradle of early post-flood civilization in many traditional and biblical interpretations. Gobekli Tepe, what is it? A massive ritual complex built on a hilltop, features large T-shaped stone pillars, some over 16 feet tall, arranged in circular enclosures, carvings of animals, humanoid figures, and abstract symbols. Its location, symbolism, and high mountain setting have caused some biblical researchers and historians to connect it to Noah's descendants beginning to repopulate the earth. The idea that early post flood peoples lived in the mountains, as Josephus says, a pre urban highland, a spiritual society that was later replaced by lowland urban and rebellious civilizations. Göbekli Tepe and Mount Ararat are both in the highlands of eastern Turkey. After the flood, people lived in the mountains. Josephus confirms this. An ancient mountaintop ritual center, possibly from a post flood or early post cataclysmic society. The people went from highland sacred spaces to lowland cities and made man made sacred towers, ziggurats. Early societies may have honored the divine on mountaintops, but later sought to reach God in their own way. The Tower of Babel and ziggurats. With the help of artificial intelligence, reconstructing the mountains of Ararat post flood. The foreground, the figure, or the man, his skin tone and morphology. The man has a chocolate brown complexion, robust features, and woolly textured hair.
closely reflecting the Euro-African and asteroid Negroid type early anthropologists described in the ancient Near East. His clothing and ornaments, his simple garment, perhaps woven from wool or linen, marks him as part of the early Bronze Age Anatolian mountain cultures, 3000 BC, Anatolian, Turkey. He stands upright, almost priest-like, giving him dignity and presence in this monumental, sacred space. The setting, Göbekli Tepe, megalithic pillars. Behind him rise the iconic T-shaped stones of Göbekli Tepe, carved with reliefs of animals and abstract symbols. These represent the oldest known monumental religious site associated with ancestor veneration and celestial alignments. The mountain environment. The backdrop includes rocky highlands and a sweeping horizon, situated in the figure in the uplands of Anatolia or Turkey, around Mount Ararat, where early farming and ritual centers flourished after the Ice Age or the Flood. Symbolism, central stance. By placing him at the heart of Göbekli Tepe, the painting emphasizes the human role in mediating between the ancestors, nature, and the divine. Contrast of man and stones. The human figure, flesh, blood, and lineage, stands before the eternal carved stones, symbolizing how mortal life is bound to ancestral memory and sacred order. Only here, more than an ethnic marker, it connects him to primeval man, evoking continuity with the first generations after the flood and the memory of ancient peoples. Hidden message. The image visually reconstructs a forgotten physical type of the Near East, often ignored in modern retellings, placing him where religion, ancestry, and culture first crystallized. It is a reminder that the earliest sacred architecture arose in mountains and from people who carry both African and Asiatic traits, a bridge between worlds. Early hilltop or highland shrines, like Göbekli Tepe, represent the earliest known expressions of organized religious behavior, and in many ways, they may be seen as the roots of all latter world religions. The hilltop shrines are the origins of all the world religions. The core themes expressed in these early mountain shrines became universal religious patterns, foundations of world religions. These mountain shrines likely represent the primordial form of religious life before the rise of organized priesthoods, formal doctrines, or written scriptures. The mountain of God theme is universal, appearing in the Hebrew Bible, Mount Sinai, where Moses and the Israelites received the commandments, Mount Zion, where the Most High placed his name, and the only place where legal sacrifice is offered, Mount Moriah. In the Greek religion, Mount Olympus. In the Hindu and Buddhist religion, Mount Kailash and Mount Meru. In the Mesoamerican religions, when the 10 tribes came over to the Americas, they built pyramid mountain like temples like ziggurats. In Japan, Mount Fuji. From the biblical worldview perspective, if you're viewing history through a Torah or biblical lens, this idea fits with early post flood humanity seeking God, but eventually drifting into false worship, idolatry, deification of creation, human pride, the Tower of Babel, distortion of original truth. This echoed in Romans, or the book of Romans, chapter 1, verse 20 to 25, where Paul writes that mankind once knew God, but eventually worshiped the creation rather than the creator. A fascinating observation, and it's one that many researchers and symbolists has also noted. The T-shaped pillars found at Göbekli Tepe and other ancient sacred sites bear a striking resemblance to certain symbolic forms that appear in later traditions, including Freemasonry. The concept of portals, gateways, or thresholds to the divine realm is a core element found in Freemasonry, all major world religions, and many ancient spiritual systems. These portals are not always physical doors. They are often symbolic, ritual, or architectural expressions of the human desire to bridge the gap between heaven and earth, or human and divine. In ancient cultures, temples, mountains, and sacred places were seen as points of access to the gods, literal or symbolic portals. This is why Stone Mountain was used by that group in Atlanta. Do you still believe this was a grassroots organized event? Freemasonry, drawing from biblical, mystical, and ancient architectural traditions, is deeply symbolic, and the portal or threshold is a central theme in its rituals. The pillar, the pillars, Jachin and Boaz, standing at the temple's entrance, represent the gateway into divine wisdom and spiritual maturity. In Freemasonry, the idea of a portal isn't just a door, it's an initiation, a movement from darkness to light, from ignorance to illumination. Across religions, entering sacred space is equivalent to entering a new reality, a spiritual portal. Rituals, especially those involving sacred space, symbols, and initiation, are designed to alter human consciousness. Ritual and altered consciousness can bring healing, insight, and transformation. But when it's too intense, disorientating, or misused, it can overwhelm the nervous system, potentially causing trauma like symptoms. What does trauma actually mean here? Your nervous system gets stuck in a hyper or hypo aroused state. What are hyper and hypo arousal? They refer to states where your nervous system is pushed outside its window of tolerance, the zone where you can feel, think, and function well. I am not giving medical advice, just commentary. Even under stress, altered states of consciousness, rather from ritual, drugs, sleep deprivation, or intense emotion, can sometimes trigger psychosis in vulnerable individuals. After powerful rituals or any experience that alters consciousness, it's very common for people to display unusual or strange behavior, just like intense dreams or psychedelics. Rituals can unlock doors, but what comes through those doors can shake the foundations of a person's reality. These rituals became systematized in ancient Sumer, which is the region the Bible calls the plain of Shinar, the book of Genesis, chapter 11, verse 2. Dictionaries. The Blue Letter Bible. Dictionaries. Shinar, the land of Shinar. Shinar, the land of. In the inscriptions, Shumer, probably identical with Babylonia or southern Mesopotamia, extending almost to the Persian Gulf. Here, the Tower of Babel was built. Genesis 11, verse 1 through 6. And the city of Babylon. Shinar, the land of Shinar. From Easton's Bible Dictionary. Blue Letter Bible. Many scholars, anthropologists, and spiritual historians have noted the ritual systems, temple structures, and sacred cosmologies that was first systematized in the Near East, especially in the mountains and plains of the Fertile Crescent, spread globally over time, influencing nearly every major religious and esoteric tradition. From the mountains to the plain of Shinar. The book of Genesis, chapter 11, verse 2. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. This is the migration of post-flood humanity from highlands, likely the Zagros or Armenian mountains near Ararat, to the Mesopotamian plain. This movement symbolically marks a transition from natural worship sites like hilltops, altars, mountain shrines, to constructed formal temples and ritual systems. Global diffusion of this ritual model. The ritual system that developed in Shinar, Mesopotamia, spread both directly and indirectly to Egypt. Their temples were aligned to the stars. Their priesthood structure, death resurrection mythology, Osiris, and their use of sacred geometry, ritual, purification, and initiation. It also spread to Persia, Greece, and Rome. The mystery religions, Eleusinians, Mithraic, etc., with initiation ceremonies, rebirth and ritual, death, resurrection, reenactments. Temples as places of cosmic order and human divine encounters. Also to India in the East, Vedic ritual shares common themes, fire altars, sacred space, cylindrical time, mantras, and their temple architecture reflects cosmic mountain, Morul concept, which is a cosmic mountain in the Vedic tradition. Even to Africa and the Americas, where the 10 tribes were located, pyramids and sacred mounds, Maya, Olmec, Nubia, acts as ritual centers. Priesthoods, altered states, cosmological temples. These patterns suggest a shared archetypical impulse to build sacred structures, perform rituals, and reconnect with the divine. Freemasonry, Hermeticism, and other systems involving initiation inherit these ancient ritual structures in symbolic form. The ritual systems of Sumer, Shinar, were among the first to become formalized, becoming a model or example for sacred architecture and spiritual practices. These systems spread globally, influencing major world religions, mystery schools, and indigenous traditions. These central concepts of sacred space, altered consciousness, divine contact are universal and continue to shape human spirituality. What began in hilltop shrines in the Middle East around the mountain of Ararat and in the plain of Shinar with ziggurats became the rituals of temples, churches, mosques, lodges, and sacred sites across history and the globe.